The friction between witnessed truth and mandated silence is perhaps the oldest conflict played out in the hidden rooms of institutional power. Across decades, there exist specific events, not merely undocumented, but documented by the absolute ferocity of their subsequent erasure. These incidents live in the deep, labyrinthine corridors of state archives, filed under protocols bearing stamps such as immediate suppression or Project Veil, detailing encounters so profoundly jarring, so antithetical to established paradigms, that they required the instantaneous and surgical redirection of citizen memory. The focus was never merely denial. It was the meticulous replacement of a vivid, inconvenient reality with a pre-approved, manageable fiction. The process of historical omission is rarely chaotic. It is systematic, cold, and exhaustive. It begins with the sensory input of the initial witnesses, the shocking, undeniable feel of reality shifting, and culminates in the imposition of a sterile narrative designed to crumble any lingering trace of doubt into statistical noise. These 5 events serve as spectral evidence of a heavily managed reality, where the official record is less a reflection of what happened and more a testament to what we have been commanded to forget. The first documented incident unfolds in the severe atmosphere of a remote, frost-bitten plain, specifically during the waning days of the calendar year 1978. The landscape was defined by sharp, biting winds and endless acres of brittle, crystallized snow, reflecting the weak, low-hanging sun. The location, chosen for its absolute isolation, housed a joint civilian and military radar installation, a skeletal structure of antennae rotating against a sky the color of slate. The air inside the control bunker was thick with the humid, electric smell of overworked vacuum tubes and the persistent background hiss of high-frequency static. It began as an anomaly on the primary tracking display, a signature registering immense density but zero heat output, moving with speeds that made the seasoned operators exchange worried glances over the glow of their amber screens. At first, it was dismissed as an inversion layer or atmospheric interference, the standard protocols for handling the improbable. But the object did not disperse, it consolidated. The military radar system, capable of filtering atmospheric debris down to millimeters, locked onto the target. A perfect, immense triangle, spanning hundreds of feet, occupying a fixed position over the barren snowscape. Visual confirmation soon followed, delivered first through high-power optics, and then, terrifyingly, by direct sight. The object was silent, utterly void of aerodynamic noise, and blacker than polished obsidian. It did not merely reflect light, it seemed to actively absorb it, appearing as a hole carved into the texture of the night sky. Its outline defined only by the distortion of the stars passing behind its massive form. Witnesses, mostly technicians trained in clinical observation, later described a pervasive feeling of temporal dislocation in its presence, as if physics itself had been momentarily suspended. The triangular object began maneuvers that defied every known principle of inertia and mass. It executed abrupt 90-degree turns at impossible velocity, stopping instantaneously and then accelerating vertically without transitional movement. The operators, their faces illuminated by the frantic strobing of alert lights, tracked its movements across the screen, their hands slick with cold sweat. The tension peaked when the object, after hovering motionlessly for nearly 15 minutes, ascended into the stratosphere in a single, blurring movement. The sensory impact was staggering, a blinding flash of electric blue light, followed by a violent atmospheric shockwave that rattled the bunker's concrete foundations, leaving behind a sharp, metallic scent reminiscent of ozone and burnt wiring. The debriefing process began within hours. Witnesses were transported blindfolded to temporary holding facilities marked by their overwhelming sterility. The walls were painted a uniform, uncompromising white, and the environment lacked any personalizing details, a deliberate design choice intended to maximize psychological isolation. The air conditioning hummed incessantly, masking any external sound. Inside these rooms, the memory surgery began. The subjects were exposed to standardized psychological profiles and interviews conducted by non-uniformed personnel, whose manner was polite but chillingly efficient. The narrative was meticulously constructed. The visual sighting was a combination of meteorological optics and stress-induced hallucination. The radar track was attributable to a sophisticated but ultimately benign atmospheric disturbance, paired with a confirmed system miscalibration during a critical test phase. Every vivid, damning detail, the absorption of light, the smell of ozone, the inertial defiance, was systematically replaced with technical jargon and statistical probability models. For the military personnel, the instruction was clear and non-negotiable. Adherence to the official report was paramount to national security. The civilian technicians were offered generous, immediate retirement packages contingent upon lifetime confidentiality agreements. The collective memory of the Obsidian Triangle was thus filed away, not as a lie, but as a solved engineering problem. Vanishing into the cold silence of the frost-bitten plain. The files detailing the second critical incident shift the focus from the cold expanse of the atmosphere to the crushing blackness of the deep ocean, nearly 300 miles off the Pacific coast. The event involved a highly specialized, cutting-edge deep-sea submersible designed to withstand pressures in excess of the abyssal zone's most hostile environment. The mission objective was geological sampling near a newly charted chain of hydrothermal vents, where life persists under unimaginable stress. The abyssal zone is a realm of absolute darkness, where light is a forgotten concept, and the ambient temperature hovers just above freezing. Inside the submersible's cramped titanium hull, the three-person crew operated in a world defined by the green glow of monitors and the rhythmic thrum of life support machinery. The silence outside was broken only by the intermittent pinging of sonar and the creaking strain of the hull adjusting to the immense hydrostatic pressure. A sound that felt less like machinery and more like the breath of the ocean floor. Operating at a depth that rendered the surface world conceptually irrelevant, the submersible navigated through a field of massive, pillow-shaped basalt formations, the expected signature of recent volcanic activity. The discovery was made not by the optical sensors, which strained against the perpetual night, but by the sensitive forward-scanning multi-beam sonar. The display suddenly registered a massive, upright structure that possessed an unnerving geometrical precision that defied any natural formation process. The pilot carefully guided the vessel closer, activating the powerful external floodlights, which pierced the inky water with cones of sickly yellow light. What they found was an architectural structure, not wreckage, not debris, but an installation. Rising impossibly from the muddy, undisturbed sediment was a perfectly aligned basaltic column, towering perhaps 200 feet above the surrounding plain. It possessed edges that were too sharp, too intentionally formed to be the result of crystallization or erosion. The most jarring detail was its texture. When the robotic arm extended a sample drill, the high-definition cameras relayed a surface that was impossibly smooth, feeling almost wet and glassy, yet resisting the high-torque titanium drill bit. It was not polished, but appeared inherently smooth, like a crystalline structure grown without flaw. The column emitted a low, resonant hum, a subsonic frequency that was not merely heard, but felt. A vibration that resonated through the titanium hull, bypassing the noise insulation and settling deep within the crew's chests. affecting their internal equilibrium and generating a palpable anxiety that transcended the normal stress of deep-sea exploration. The mission commander, a marine geologist with 3 decades of fieldwork, radioed the surface vessel, his voice clipped and strained, confirming the impossible. They had encountered something non-geological, non-biological, and unmistakably artificial. The standard scientific recovery operation was instantly halted, not by local command, but by an executive order transmitted directly from a high-level authority miles away, delivered over an encrypted channel that squelched all extraneous sound. The surface vessel's subsequent actions were characterized by rapid, desperate efficiency. The submersible was ordered to ascend immediately, leaving all instruments deployed and the raw data logs sealed in their pressure-resistant housing. The sensory shift from the absolute pressure and darkness of the abyssal zone to the rocking surface and glare of the sun was disorienting. Back on deck, the crew found themselves isolated, their vessel immediately quarantined and later airlifted away under heavy tarps. The official explanation, prepared for public and internal consumption, centered on the detection of an unprecedented geological anomaly, a massive, naturally occurring igneous intrusion whose structure was misinterpreted due to pressure distortions and sonar interference. The key element of the suppression was to destroy the subjective sensory data. The low, resonant hum and the feeling of internal vibration were attributed to mechanical failure of the submersible's life support system under extreme stress, a physical reaction, not an external stimulus. The crew, sworn to secrecy, under threat of charges related to deep-sea resource violation and espionage, were left with the unsettling memory of perfect symmetry carved into the planet's deepest, darkest heart. The basaltic column remained, buried under a new layer of mandatory silence. The third documented event pulls the narrative into the secured subterranean reality of the Cold War legacy, a complex missile silo carved into the granite bedrock of a remote mountain range. This environment is one of clinical, calculated danger, where human error and mechanical malfunction are matters of global consequence. The air is cold, dry, and smells faintly of electronics, ozone, and recirculated air. The silence is profound, broken only by the steady, measured hum of ventilation systems and the distant echo of footsteps on cold concrete floors. The incident occurred during a routine readiness drill, a choreographed sequence of system checks designed to ensure the immediate launch capability of the strategic assets housed within. The personnel involved were uniformed officers whose faces were etched by years of institutional stress, their movements practiced, economical, and taught with perpetual vigilance. During the simulated launch sequence, the standard green indicator lights, denoting operational readiness and passive status, began to change. The silence was instantly shattered by the frantic, aggressive pulse of the critical red strobe, bathing the metal console in an unmistakable emergency. The suddenness of the shift was paralyzing. In the hermetically sealed control room, the alert siren, usually reserved for drills, screamed with genuine, visceral urgency. Telemetry indicators flashed across the main console, confirming the nightmare scenario. The sequence was live. The physical activation systems, designed to require multiple layered human authorizations, were bypassing the established chain of command. The chilling realization came when the diagnostic readouts confirmed the source of the launch signal. It was not internal. It was an unknown external command penetrating the hardened network. A clean, digitally perfect signal that breached multiple layers of electronic security specifically designed to filter and reject unauthorized input. The tension in the control room became suffocating. Every officer present understood the thin line they were walking, a near-catastrophic malfunction that could trigger an irreversible global response. One officer, acting on instinct honed by years of training, lunged for the manual override, a heavy, cold metal lever encased in a locked, transparent shield. With adrenaline lending strength, he broke the seal and slammed the lever down just as the final sequence indicators began their irreversible countdown. The ensuing silence was deafening, the only sound the ragged breathing of the uniformed personnel and the slow, agonizing deceleration of the alert siren. The launch sequence was averted by mere milliseconds, leaving the strategic asset inert, resting in its cold granite cradle. But the core technical truth remained undeniable. Something external, something intelligent, had commanded the launch, bypassing every safeguard designed by the best minds in defense architecture. The aftermath was immediate and severe. The entire subterranean complex was placed under indefinite lockdown. The officers present were removed in silent, efficient operations, their uniforms crisp, their faces pale with shock. They were not charged, they were detained for immediate and indefinite evaluation. They were subjected to intense pharmacological protocols designed to stabilize their physical stress responses and, more importantly, to fog the precise details of the telemetry data. The official inquiry was classified beyond top secret, its findings eventually concluding that a complex sequence of cascading software failures, triggered by an undetectable micrometeoroid impact on an external communications satellite, resulted in a ghost signal mimicking command protocols. Those present, stripped of their command authority and placed under continuous monitoring, were told their memories of a structured external command were merely an interpretation of corrupted data, a psychological defense mechanism processing the stress of near catastrophe. The memory of the clean, penetrating signal that defied logic was systematically erased, replaced by the approved complex tapestry of statistical hardware error. The lesson was enforced. The system must always be understood as infallibly mechanical, never subject to external, unknown intent. The fourth incident shifts the global location again, moving away from institutional darkness into the blinding, sun-baked landscape of the Arabian Peninsula. Here, in the desolate sands, a routine archaeological survey was underway, financed by an international consortium hoping to uncover early Bronze Age trade routes. The environment was oppressive, the air thick with heat, the light intense, and the constant grit of fine sand permeating every piece of equipment and clothing. The ground smelled of dust, heat, and millennia of decay. The excavation was methodical, laid out in precise grids. They had dug deep into a previously unexplored stratum, far beneath the expected historical layers. When the team encountered resistance, unlike rock or pottery, the lead archaeologist, painstakingly brushing away the fine dust, uncovered an object that instantly signaled its profound dissimilarity to the surrounding context. It was a complex, angular device, small enough to be held, but too intricate to be easily categorized. Crucially, it was made of a non-metallic alloy, possessing a muted, dark surface that seemed to absorb and diffuse the intense desert sunlight rather than reflect it. It bore no resemblance to known metallurgy or human artifacts from any recorded era. As more of the device was excavated, its unsettling qualities became pronounced. Its surface bore inscriptions, not hieroglyphs, not cuneiform, but patterns unlike any known human script, consisting of perfectly intersecting geometric shapes that generated a dizzying sense of intentionality. The most unnerving element was the energy field surrounding the object. It emitted a faint, persistent hum, too low to register as noise, but generating a palpable field of static electricity. The air around the immediate excavation site felt charged. The archaeologist's hair stood slightly on end, and a faint, dry, metallic taste developed in their mouths. When specialized sensor equipment was brought in, The readings confirmed low-level energy emissions and an organized structural field, sustained despite the device being buried for potentially tens of thousands of years. Scientific euphoria quickly turned to dread. The discovery was too significant, too alien, to manage within standard academic channels. Before the data could be thoroughly logged, before high-resolution scans were complete, the desert silence was shattered by the arrival of specialized units. These were not local military. They were federal agents, moving with a silent, ruthless efficiency that suggested long practice. Their vehicles were sterile, heavy, and churned the sand into clouds of fine dust. The sweep was absolute. All photographic plates, excavation logs, and carbon dating samples were immediately confiscated. The academic team was contained and isolated. The device itself was extracted with extreme care, sealed in a non-conductive container and loaded onto a specialized transport. The final act of suppression was the deliberate destruction of the site. Fuel and chemicals were used to sanitize and scorch the ground where the device had rested, leaving behind only the acrid smell of scorched earth and diesel exhaust to mingle with the ancient dust. The archaeologists, professionals accustomed to working with facts and evidence, were provided with an officially fabricated excavation report citing an unstable iron-rich meteorite fragment that disintegrated upon contact with oxygen. They were informed with cold formality that their initial fantastic claims of complex alloy and geometric script were products of heat exhaustion and the resulting cognitive distortion. They were witnesses to an object that challenged the very definition of humanity's antiquity. And in return, they were granted the gift of permanent, bewildered silence, their moment of profound discovery reduced to a myth whispered among colleagues who dared not commit the details to writing.
The final incident details a confrontation between observed celestial truth and institutional mandate, set not in the cold of space, but in the sterile, climate-controlled environment of a high-altitude astrophysical observatory.
The structure was defined by its immense, curved mirror dish, reflecting the impossibly clear, cold night sky. The internal environment was dedicated to precision. The quiet whir of cooling fans, the steady tracking adjustments, and the meticulous collection of data streams. The central figure was a young astrophysicist, a prodigious talent whose specialization lay in filtering cosmic background noise to identify non-random patterns. The work was painstaking, requiring an intimate knowledge of stellar mechanics and the chaotic nature of universal radiation. It was during a routine calibration sweep of a seemingly unremarkable, localized stellar coordinate, distant, faint, and spectroscopically cold, that the anomaly appeared. On the primary data visualization grid, the signal was immediate and undeniable. It was not the smooth, statistically predictable curve of stellar noise, nor the jagged, chaotic spikes of a pulsar or distant quasar. This signal was highly structured. The visual display of the signal was hauntingly clean, sharp peaks and deep troughs forming repeating patterns that demonstrated a mathematical intentionality. It possessed a narrow bandwidth, sustained pulse rate, and complex modulation that screamed of organization. It was, in the language of the discipline, a non-random, artificial signal. For days, the astrophysicist worked in isolation, cross-referencing the data, utilizing every filter and diagnostic tool available, attempting to find a terrestrial origin, a satellite echo, or a hardware malfunction. Every test confirmed the terrifying fact: the signal was originating precisely from the designated stellar coordinate, maintaining its complexity and structure across multiple observation cycles. It was data that fundamentally rewrote the human narrative of solitude. The brief window between discovery and verification was all that was needed for the mechanism of suppression to engage. The intervention was silent and swift, executed not by uniformed military, but by administrative agents, whose bland attire and bureaucratic demeanor were themselves instruments of intimidation. They arrived with pre-signed directives, moving with the quiet authority of those who knew they operated outside judicial review. The primary target was the sophisticated imaging equipment. The agents systematically disassembled the hardware, carefully confiscating the core processing units and data storage arrays. The physical weight and cold metal of the seized machines underscored the gravity of the institutional response. The astrophysicist was presented with two documents, a non-disclosure agreement of crushing complexity and a mandatory re-education directive. This directive was the intellectual component of the erasure. It was a structured program aimed at replacing the vivid, damning detail of the received signal with an approved tapestry of statistical noise. The mandate was to professionally accept that the structured signal was merely an interpretation error caused by an unforeseen exotic form of radio interference unique to the stellar coordinates specific platform. The mandate was to professionally accept that the structured signal was merely an interpretation error caused by an unforeseen exotic form of radio interference unique to the stellar coordinates specific plasma characteristics. It mandated that the scientists recalibrate their entire methodology based on the premise that intelligent life signals are, by definition, an impossibility until proven otherwise by a global consensus that would never be. It mandated that the scientists recalibrate their entire methodology based on the premise that intelligent life signals are, by definition, an impossibility until proven otherwise by a global consensus that would never be permitted to form. The young researcher was left with the knowledge of a universe that had spoken, and the grim reality that the systems governing human knowledge had deafened themselves to the sound. The truth of the structured signal became a memory to be buried beneath the daily rituals of professional denial, transforming a profound scientific breakthrough into a career-ending professional lapse. These 5 incidents, ranging across decades and environments, from the frost-bitten plain to the abyssal depths, from the granite silo to the desolate sands, and the high-altitude observatory, do not merely describe historical events. They describe the operational methodology of a managed reality. The objects themselves, the black triangle, the basaltic column, the unauthorized signal, the complex alloy, the organized radio transmission, were too disruptive to the authorized worldview. They were excised from history not because they were unbelievable, but precisely because they were demonstrably, physically real. The trauma inflicted upon the witnesses was not physical harm, but intellectual violation. The methodical process of teaching someone who has seen the truth how to sincerely embrace a lie. The final outcome of each operation was not simply the removal of evidence, but the creation of a definitive historical omission, ensuring that the critical sensory details of the impossible were permanently filed away in the archives of silence, leaving behind only the approved, smooth, and utterly empty narrative of atmospheric disturbance, geological anomaly, hardware failure, metallurgical fluke, and statistical noise.